You can't build a house with someone who just knows how to stack bricks. The words echoed in the cavernous hall of the Innovate Next Tech Summit, coming from a man I once called my friend, my partner. The spotlight hit Xavier just so, turning him into a stark, authoritative silhouette against the massive screen behind him. It was a perfect piece of stagecraft. He was a visionary, and I was just the bricklayer. I felt the vibration of polite applause through the floor. From my seat in the 12th row, I raised my phone, recorded his bow, and typed a short text. Enjoy the moment, Xavier. I met him at a university hackathon 7 years ago. He had the charisma, the easy smile that could fill a room and charm venture capitalists out of their tailored suits. I had the code. He pitched, I built. Our first project, a clunky but functional scheduling app, won second place. We celebrated at a dive bar, sketching our next idea on a stack of damp napkins. That idea became Scribe. I remember the smell of stale beer and boundless possibility. The first red flag came a year later. He'd pitched our prototype to an angel investor without telling me. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, he'd said, his apology so earnest it felt like an attack to doubt it. He gave you all the credit, he insisted. I saw our first check for $25,000 and I chose to believe him. The next 3 years were a blur of creation. Late nights at a 24-hour coffee shop called The Daily Grind, fueled by overpriced oat milk lattes and a shared dream. We landed a $75,000 seed round. We leased a tiny glass-walled office. Those were the golden days. I remember the September we launched our beta. We got 1,000 signups in the first week. We bought a bottle of Yamakadze 12 and drank it straight from the bottle on the floor of our empty office, mapping out the future on a whiteboard. But the balance was already shifting. I was pulling 80-hour weeks, debugging code, refining the user interface, personally answering support tickets. Xavier was the face. He was building the brand, which meant long lunches at Spago and speaking on panels about a product whose backend he couldn't navigate. He insisted on a salary 40% higher than mine for client-facing expenses. I was the engine, he was the chassis. You can't have a car without both, I told myself. It was a partnership. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday. I was searching our shared Google Drive for an old asset file from 2021. As I typed, a folder name autofilled that I'd never seen before, Legacy Archive V Final. It wasn't a shared folder, but he'd made a mistake, saving it in the root of the company drive instead of his personal one. My access was still admin level. A click, and my world tilted. Inside were dozens of documents. Revised pitch decks where my title was demoted from co-founder to lead developer. A rewritten Our Story page that described Xavier conceiving of Scribe alone in his dorm room. He was systematically editing me out of our own history. He was performing an archival erasure, preparing to push me out before our Series A funding, which would value the company in the millions. For the next 6 weeks, I said nothing. I hired a digital forensics expert who, using my credentials, legally recovered deleted emails from our servers. I took screenshots. I documented every line of code I'd ever written, cross-referencing my Git commit history. The betrayal wasn't just about credit. It was a meticulous plan to steal our shared future. Every new piece of evidence felt like another shovelful of dirt on a grave he was digging for my career. The breaking point was that night at the Innovate Next Summit. Xavier was on stage accepting the Founder of the Year award. My name was never mentioned. He held the Lucite trophy like a scepter, his voice ringing with false humility. It takes courage to go it alone. To believe in your own vision when others are content to just follow instructions. Scribe is my vision. It's the product of my sweat, my risk, my soul. He was magnificent, a con artist at the peak of his power. The audience was eating it up. In that moment, watching him bathed in the spotlight, I felt no anger, just a profound, chilling calm. The plan bloomed in my mind, fully formed. On the giant screen behind him, he'd put up a slide of Scribe's original wireframe, a JPEG I had designed on my MacBook in 2020. It was the visual cornerstone of his fabricated origin story. He'd forgotten, or never known, that I'd embedded a tiny, invisible digital watermark in that file, a string of hexadecimal code that, when decoded, spelled out my initials and the date. It was my signature, hidden in plain sight. The next morning, I called Zola Ramirez, a notoriously sharp intellectual property lawyer. Our first meeting was in her sterile, gray office. She listened without expression as I laid out the story. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "This is clean," she said, "but it will be expensive." The retainer was $20,000. I transferred the money from my savings without a second thought. For 4 months, we built our case in secret. There was one close call. Xavier saw me leaving Zola's building downtown. He texted, "What were you doing at 5th and Grand?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd seen a dentist's office in the lobby. "Visiting my friend," I texted back. "She's a hygienist for Dr. Peterson." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. The case we built was an fortress. We had my original dated napkin sketches, the complete Git commit history showing I'd written 92% of the core application, the recovered emails of him pitching himself as the sole creator, transaction records from my personal bank account showing I'd paid for our first 2 years of server hosting, and every file from his legacy archive folder. The final piece was an ironic gift from the universe. A tech blogger DM'd me on Instagram. "Weird question," he wrote. "Did Xavier design that original UI? I remember you showing me something almost identical in 2021 at the Daily Grind." Zola smiled when I showed her. "There's our third-party witness." We filed for binding arbitration, citing breach of contract. We deliberately framed it as a financial dispute, a fight over equity percentages. It was a decoy. Xavier walked right into the trap, assuming it was a negotiation he could win with his checkbook. The arbitration took place in a windowless room with a long, polished table that reflected the grim overhead lights. It was just me and Zola facing Xavier and his smug, expensive lawyer. "We're here to discuss the dissolution of a partnership," Zola began, her voice flat and even. Xavier laughed. "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair, "if this is about getting a bigger cut, just name your price. I'm happy to be generous to an early contributor." Zola ignored him. She started with the financials, the salary discrepancies, the misused funds. Xavier's lawyers started taking notes, his smirk fading. Then came the second wave. Zola presented the archival erasure documents, the altered pitch decks, the emails. Xavier went pale. He started stammering, calling them thought experiments, strategic drafts. His lawyer put a hand on his arm to silence him. For the finale, Zola connected her laptop to the room's monitor. The Scribe wireframe appeared on the screen, the exact one from his award ceremony. "Mr. Vance," she asked, "you claim this as your original design?" Xavier, trying to regain his footing, nodded curtly. "Of course." Zola ran a simple steganography program. A small window popped up, and a line of text appeared. NR 1014-20. The arbitrator leaned forward, peering at the screen. Zola then read the blogger's message aloud. Xavier slumped in his chair, as if his bones had dissolved. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He whispered my name. "You were my friend." I looked at him, at the hollowed-out man who had built his success on my silence. "No, I was your partner." The fallout was immediate and absolute. The arbitrator awarded me 70% of the company equity and sole control of all intellectual property. A story ran on TechCrunch. Scribe co-founder ousted amidst archival erasure scandal. The Founder of the Year award was publicly rescinded. Xavier was forced to sell his loft to cover his legal fees and the money he was ordered to repay the company. The last I heard, he was interviewing for a junior marketing position at a failing startup. I saw him once, months later, through the window of a Starbucks on a rainy afternoon. He was hunched over a laptop, looking small and insignificant, a ghost haunting a life that was never really his. My life moved on. I rebranded, I hired a small, brilliant team. My new office overlooks the city, and the work we do is honest. It's quiet and focused, and it is entirely mine. Last week, a journalist asked me for a podcast what it takes to be a great founder. I thought of the spotlight, the cheering crowd, and Xavier's stolen words. You need a visionary, I said, someone who can see the architecture, the soul of the thing. And you need a builder who knows exactly how to stack the bricks. It turns out I was always both.